Welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast, the photo imaging industry's leading news source. Here's your host, Gary Peugeot. The Dead Pixel Society podcast is brought to you by Media Clip, Advertech Printing, and Independent Photo Imagers.
Hello again and welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. I'm your host, Gary Peugeot, and today we're joined by Stewart Cohen, who's been running SC Pictures out of Dallas, Texas for a lot of years. He's a commercial photographer, and he's got a lot of insights to share. Hi, Stewart. How are you today?
Gary, thanks for having me. I'm kind of excited to be here. Just our initial conversations about the photo biz are intriguing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I kind of wish we'd started recording about 15 minutes ago when we were doing the preamble for this. That's usually how it goes, though. So, Stewart, tell us your story about being a commercial photographer, how you got into the business, how you've stayed in the business. As we know, that has changed dramatically over the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Indeed. How I got into it is I loved seeing work that people were doing, like traveling all over the world, meeting new people and just really exotic stuff. I went down the old path of commercial photography where I went to school and then I worked as a photo assistant for a couple of years. I had the good opportunity to do some time working with Arnold Newman and Helmut Newton.
Okay.
So my photo assisting life was fantastic. And then I started out on my own, and I still have assistants that come work for me. And I have this whole now yearbook of guys that had gone on to have really great careers. And I know the old way of assisting has gone away a lot. A lot of people think they could do it without doing it. Although everybody that comes through here says, and this is what I learned too, is there's so much you learn from an established working photographer that you could never learn from a YouTube video.
Well, yeah, of course. And that is sort of one of the things that's changed, right? Is sort of that whole idea of the process where, you're going to be the person on the side schlepping film into the film backs and handing them off to the photographer and keeping those things in, labeled for the lab and all those organizational type things you need to know. And that's kind of gone by the wayside.
Right. But at the same time, you were also, packing to travel, flying through airports, staying in hotels, learning how to deal with clients, learning how to interact, going to client dinners and learning how to be a human being, as opposed to like a college student. So there was a lot of learning, like life learning, that I think that's what's gone. And understanding, like when you'd be on a huge job, if I had come out of school and nobody would present you with a job that's like $500,000, but all of a sudden, you're number 2 in command on a project that has a lot of money attached to it. You learn a lot and you learn fast and you learn how to take on that responsibility and how to be comfortable with that responsibility. And I think that's what's really important. The second part of your question is, and it's an easy one, and that's why I'll just answer it quickly. Like, how have I stayed in this business and maintained it? I mean, maybe because I'm too dumb to change, but no, I love it. I mean, I still love it. I still 2 weeks ago, I was in Shanghai and one of my old assistants lives there and we were out. I made him take me around to certain areas I wanted to see that he had never been to. And he's just watching me shoot. And he's like, man, you really love this, don't you? And I'm like, I absolutely do. He said, I don't love it as much as that. I'm not doing it like you are. And I think that probably pretty much sums it up. It's like, I do love it. And I think that's why you stick with anything.
Right. Well, that's tough though, to keep that sort of passion going, because I had a friend of mine who's a photographer, kind of does weddings on the weekend, that sort of thing. And he says, nothing kills your love of photography faster than having a photography business.
Well, I mean, some people could say that, or it fuels it,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Now, granted, if I had done weddings my whole career or ever and had to deal with mothers of the bride, I don't think I would love it either.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a huge admirer of some of that work that's being done these days by some wedding guys, but they have budgets like it's like $1 million shoot. With great styling and everyone's dressed perfectly and the flowers are perfect. And so it's like they have this beautiful set. Like for us to do a TV commercial or still shoot that's dressed so perfectly, that's an expensive shoot.
Right.
So aside from if you could get around the stress of it being somebody's biggest day and you better not mess it up, I mean,
Right.
I think there's some really fantastic moments to be captured.
Sure. Now, was that a conscious decision on your part to not do weddings or that sort of thing? Because why? What was that decision? Because I mean, if you worked with, Helmut Newton, you certainly saw portraiture being done.
Sure. Well, I mean, the weddings it was just never on my radar.
Mm.
I like we were saying earlier, I think it was considered a different kind of photography, and I always wanted to do commercial advertising work. And yeah, so it just never really crossed my radar. I went after corporate, like when I started out, was still back in the day of annual reports. And yeah, but I mean, one of my first big jobs was I got to do the Intel annual report where I went around the world. And luckily, I had done things like that when I was a photo assistant, so it didn't totally freak me out. But it was like you just traveled and you got to go places, and they'd say shoot cool stuff,
Right.
and it was fantastic. So that was my entrance, and probably the first, I don't know, 5-10 years, we did a lot of that stuff, and
Mhm.
basically not a lot of art direction. So it wasn't like, subsequently, like when I got into the ad game, you'd have a layout and you're shooting for a layout.
Mhm.
But those early days, we need a couple pictures from each office in 7 countries. Go do
Right.
it. And it
Right.
would just be like, wow, okay. And
Yeah.
so, you'd go, it was small crews back then, there was maybe 3 or 4 of you
Mhm.
total. And it would just be like, come up with good stuff, and you'd be
Right.
working. And those days, that was with a lot of good graphic designers. So it was a good training too, because these guys had super great eyes. If your work wasn't really great, you weren't getting the next year's job.
Right.
So, yeah.
So I'm just curious, like, in that era, right? We're talking about film, we're talking about all that, that era of commercial photography. How do you get that your foot in the door on a lot of those things? Because there weren't like, online portfolios or anything like they have now, right? Or, you
And
can't.
no Instagram
I
feeds.
was gonna
Yeah.
say there's no Insta feed or any of that stuff. So
No, it was old school portfolios, that you would have a printed portfolio, or the other thing we did is we had enlarged transparencies that we would mount
Mhm.
like on 11 by 14 boards, like
Mhm.
prints. And we had a big portfolio box, and people would hold them up to the light, and you would ship those around to people if they called or you called them, and they would look at your portfolio, and it would be whatever, 20, 25 pieces, and they would hire you off of that. A lot of word of mouth went a long way, and I think it still does,
Yeah,
really.
I don't think that's changing.
Nah, but that was it.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so if somebody was looking to do a project, they would call in 10 or 15 portfolios and go through them all, and probably make some internal decision, and then of
Mhm.
course vet it with the client. We would pay for shipping one way, and they would pay for it the other way.
Mhm.
But we had, like, I don't know, 10 or 12 copies of this portfolio.
Yeah, I was gonna
So
say because I'm sure some of them never made it back.
no, they always did, but it would be like there would be days that you'd be going to FedEx, at the last drop off at FedEx, and dropping off 7 or 8 portfolios and just keeping your fingers crossed.
Right. Yeah, 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 yeah. That's crazy. So now, well, can you talk about any specific like campaigns you worked on that maybe were memorable that, were kind of like highlights from back in that era?
Oh, back in that era,
Yeah.
not really.
You were doing a job, you were schlepping things around, right?
No, there was, early. I'm trying to think what it was. It was a Bud Light campaign,
Hmm.
or I think it was Bud, that we got to shoot in South Beach, with a lot of Latin models, and
Hmm.
jobs like that will always stay with me, because it was like some of the early days of getting to hire talent and great stylists, and
Right.
just again, less layouts, more like, okay, this is going to be a party at the beach. And it's like,
Right.
all right, let's do it. And then the
Right.
next day is, okay, now we're doing a party in a restaurant, you
Yeah.
know? So, I mean, those were really early. It was like, I remember once, one of the first times I went to shoot in Miami on a job like that. And on the rental car bus heading back, from the lot to the airport, thinking, this was the closest I've come to going to summer camp ever. This was so much fun. You
Right.
know,
And then the world changed, right? The whole world of commercial photography evolved and changed. Obviously, you had digital coming in, so there are all kinds of ways that workflow changed. And I don't want to get into the technical side of, that sort of world, but how did that change your business approach as a commercial photographer? Because the world of competition opened up, right? I mean,
it did.
it really opened up.
I think that was the beginning of the change because I don't think the competition like caught up immediately. But, think about the craft, like what I've seen.
Mhm.
And I do think about the craft and not shortchanging anybody today using automatic cameras. But, I like when I started, we used to have to know how to focus, and I
Right.
remember,
Backwards and upside down on a glass plate, right?
well, no, oh, yeah, well, that was 4x5, but even 35. I remember going in college, like going to the side of a freeway with a 300 millimeter lens and trying to follow license plates,
Right.
because I was able to go shoot football games for my college. So, autofocus was that was the first thing that was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And
Right.
that was, I think, in the late 90s. And so, I hadn't
Yeah.
been doing it that long, but it was a big change. And then, of course, digital, I called the digital transformation, which to me was 2006, like when the Canon 1DX came out.
Yeah.
I called that the film killer. I remember that, there was a lot of trepidation and a lot of people saying, yeah, digital is great, or no, it's not. We want to stay with film. And I was doing a big job back then for Nokia. And we decided, somebody had suggested we shoot it digitally. And we decided that we were going to do a test with their color separator. So
Mhm.
we shot the same subject on, I think it was like 3 different cameras, like film, 2 different kinds of film, and what was the preeminent digital camera at the time. And we sent them off to these color separators, and they made these giant prints, like a piece of the file, and made giant prints. And there was this whole big meeting called for my studio. Their color separators were coming, the clients were coming, everyone was coming to see this and make this decision. And these guys came in like, I don't know, 10 minutes before the meeting start and laid out these big strips. I wish I had kept them, and identifying what was what. And to me, it was like, okay, well, the conversation's over. The digital was already so much cleaner. And I never, ever shot another roll of film. Like there were 300 rolls of film in a fridge at the studio that never got used. That
Wow.
we started selling them like 10 years later, because we're like, we're never going to use this. Let's just sell it. That was a transformation for us.
Yeah.
There was, in terms of from the photo perspective, of course, there was a big dollar change because we used to charge by the roll of film.
Right.
Aside from, it was plus film and processing, and, we would have a budget for film and processing, but I'm the kind of guy that our jobs, we used to shoot 150, 200 rolls of film.
Right.
So regardless of the markup, there was markup. And
Right.
that, of course, went out the door. Then of course, digital text came into being, and you needed to keep up with, the digital technology, just monitors and laptops and hard drives.
Storage
That,
devices. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And you do burn through those, whatever you think. We use them hard and they got torn up. But again, it was just like, how do you rejigger your company to make it work
right.
for the current economy? And that's what we learned how to do. And it was like it or not, this is the way it's going. And then I think shortly thereafter, that all of a sudden there were some guys coming into the industry that really didn't understand kind of the craft that we all had to learn. And you can't really blame them for it. It's just because technology made things easier.
Mm-hmm.
And that became, the field started to get more crowded, I'll just say.
Yeah. And you've had people who may not have gone through the apprenticeships or
That's
things
correct.
like that, right? Because they've gone
Right.
direct from, and we've seen that in the portrait market too, right? Where you had traditional portrait photographers who maybe went the PPA route and they got the medals and the certifications and all that. Then
Yeah.
the weekend shooter with a Canon Rebel DSLR, and they're kind of competing and
Right.
yeah, you can see the difference, but is the difference worth it, right?
You're absolutely right. And you know what? But I will say, and I'm not gonna vote one way or another on it, because can you see the difference? Yeah, whatever. But I'm just gonna say that I really, really enjoyed the whole opportunity to work with people that were my legends.
Right.
And there would have been no other opportunity to do that, you
Right.
know.
Right.
So anyway, yeah.
So when you do that transition, right? When you see that, so how did you position yourself in the marketplace with that crowded competition, right? I mean, you had a more crowded competition, and you had, maybe who was somebody you're competing against for a job who's maybe more style than substance, if you will.
Sure, absolutely. And look, I think you got to just understand that you're competing. It's a big landscape, and we were already competing, predominantly nationally. I mean,
Mhm.
some jobs were internationally, but you're predominantly nationally. So we were already in that playing field. And then all of a sudden, these new names started to seep into that, that group of people that you'd always bid against. And it just became, that's just part of it. And so I tried to stay ahead. We definitely advertised to the trade a lot.
Mhm.
And I would really try to nurture relationships that we did
Mhm.
have, and actively look for, new relationships. Yeah. And I just think it's just one of those things. You just gotta, instead of driving on a country road, you're getting onto a 6-lane road. You
Mhm.
just gotta focus on your path,
Mhm.
and hopefully you
Mhm.
continue.
It seems like a lot of people, like I said, you get into the business because you love photography, but there's the whole business piece of it that is not really photography, right? It's just customer relations, it's new business development, it's sales, it's
Right.
acquisitions, it's doing a bunch of different things. Where did you learn that kind of stuff?
I think some of that, because I didn't go to business school,
Right,
but I
that's
think,
why I asked.
yeah, I think some of that, luckily, was like I had an innate sense that I
Mhm.
knew you couldn't spend more than you made. That's where it started.
Right.
And I do love the business. I love the business of it.
Hmm.
I'm very comfortable with the negotiations and so on and so forth. And I always watch the bottom line in a responsible way, not to a fault, but just, and would take calculated risks based
Right.
on cash and stuff like that. It was trial and error. And
Mhm.
luckily I had hired some people along the way that were really, we saw eye to eye in terms of managing the money, and it kind of set me on a good path.
Mhm. Because that's always one of the things I hear, especially in the portrait segment of the market, right? Is they're great artists, but not the greatest business people.
Well, the one thing I always say, and I've always heard, and I heard this way back, is there were people that are great business people that aren't great photographers, and they could have fantastic careers. And then there are people that are great photographers and who didn't have a lot of great business acumen, and they struggled, and a lot of them ended up leaving the field or doing something else. I think I'm lucky in that I had a pretty good split of left brain, right brain, and knew when I could turn on the, like when we were talking about rolls of film, just say, for instance, like I knew when we hit the budget, and I
Right.
wasn't going over that budget,
Right. Mhm.
So, stuff like that. Very, very cognizant of the dollars going out. And I could do that in the back of my head while still playing the creative game.
Now, is your company set up so that you're doing the most of the work? I mean, obviously it's SC Pictures and you're the SC of that, but do you have other people who are like in your stable who meet with clients and do the work? I mean, how big is your company?
The company has ebbed and flowed over the years.
Right.
I am the only person that shoots. I tried to scale the business multiple times, and I call it, years running into walls.
Right.
And I realized that it wasn't in my best interest, because then you're managing other people's careers. So I've kept it that I was the only one that's shooting, and I have a relatively, I've had a relatively large support staff on and off over the years. I have a full-time producer in Digitech, and we also leveraged a lot of the work that the previously shot work, or I shoot a lot without clients, just for licensing reasons.
Mhm. Right.
And I was pretty lucky early in my career, when the whole licensing world was exploding,
Right.
to be an early contributor to Getty Images and, its predecessor. And that taught me how to really try to leverage every frame that you shoot.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the licensing piece of the business because you own a stock organization, right? And you've made some acquisitions over the years. What kind of steered you towards that? Is it because you kind of had the idea that, intellectual property was important?
Actually, one of the guys I worked for, who I'm going to his 80th birthday in a couple of weeks, and he was a big influence on me. He exposed me to the world of licensing because people would call him to reuse something, not even through a stock agency. This is back.
Right.
And I would see it's like, wow, he shot that 2 years ago and he just got paid, X amount of dollars for it. That sounds good.
Right. Shoot
So
once, monetize multiple times. Sounds like a really good
exactly.
model.
So early on, like right when I started on my own, I started looking for, and this is early stock agencies, looking for somebody to represent my work. And I found somebody, and at the time they were called Tony Stone Images, and they were the predecessor of Getty.
I
And
remember that name.
yeah, and they had a very tight editing process, and they figured they didn't need to show a lot of work to people. They just needed to show the right work. And I started getting checks every month. I'm like, this works. And
Yeah.
and then they flow, but it had always been stuff that was shot like ancillary to a job. But
Right.
then they floated the idea of you should shoot just for licensing.
Right.
And so I started trying to do that, and it actually worked back then. And to the extent that they would say, "Hey, Stewart, like we want to do this job. We feel like there's a need for this work in Cuba." Here's an example. And then we're going back to the turn of the century, like around 2000. And they said they would send an art director and some ideas, but it's all on me financially. And they said they think that I could probably make the money back in a year, 2 years from licensing. So we went down to Cuba there illegally. No, I was Canadian. I am Canadian. And we shot and spent, I remember actually exactly how much. We spent around $40,000. When I tell you that I probably made a couple $1,000,000 off of that shoot, I'm not lying. My whistle was wet, so
Right.
to speak. So I really went head into it. Like when we weren't shooting jobs, we were shooting other things that we were trying to license. And we had some really, really great years doing that. Obviously, as you know, that industry has had some really downward price pressure as well, and a lot of competition. But yeah, so I did a lot of it. And then when Getty bought their first footage collection, was a company called Fabulous Footage. They called me because they knew I shot film too. And I flew to LA and we talked about it. And I started shooting some of their earlier productions that were shot solely for licensing. And that's pretty much how I started with it. Yeah.
So, I mean, you've acquired companies along the way. Was that just because were they opportunistic where people just said, "Hey, I want to get out of the business. Here's my library," or were there segments that you felt, would like bolster your catalog, if you will? You were trying to fill gaps in your catalog.
No, I would call it a moment of weakness. So these guys that I knew were putting together a crew to buy Superstock. And Superstock had been around since the 1970s. It was a New
Right.
York agency, and its predecessor was 4x5. These were early stock agencies.
Right.
And it was falling on hard times. This is the early 2000s. And they asked if I wanted to be a part of it. And I said, absolutely not. And then they said, well, would you invest some money to help us buy it? And we guarantee you we're going to make you money, And back in the day then, I had some cash, some liquid cash. So I threw some cash at them, and it didn't really go anywhere. And I'll just fast forward. There's a big story behind it. But years later, the company was down on its heels, and I volunteered to step in to see if I could help steer it. And through some pretty bad decisions on my part, but I loved the collection.
Right.
Like they owned some vintage archives
Right.
that I thought were really valuable. And I'm a big collector of photography as well. And so I saw the value in that. So I pretty much stepped up and bought all my partners out and invested in it and continued to invest in it, and to make sure that the technology was up to snuff, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, that's the net is here we are now in 2025, and I've owned it for 6 years and have invested in it heavily in the tech side, which makes me interested in podcasts like yours, because you start to listen to all these guys in the tech world about digital marketing and about digital development. And I've become now, that's part of my spiel also. I start to understand that. And I think it's still a hard space, but I do still love the pictures. I love we manage now 27 million assets, digital assets, video and stills. It's another adventure.
So in the last couple of years, you've had this whole generative AI thing happen, and where people are trying to, create content using prompts and things. And I've heard, there's a bunch of different, approaches to that where people are either wildly for it because it, like you said earlier, democratizes, that. There's other people who are against it because it's not real, as we were talking earlier, it's just a tool. It's just going to happen. Where is the place for a company like yours in that space? Because, I've seen what Getty's announced and some of the other people where they're like, we're going to also offer generative stuff too.
Right.
I think they're doing that to kind of, you know, seem hip and with it until they figure out what's going to happen.
Well, they are. I think Getty, Shutterstock, Adobe, they're all doing that. They're all offering it. We have a subscription to the service, that the same service they use. We haven't really implemented it in terms of creating generative fill yet, because we look at they're public companies. We look at their annual reports and they're not making any money on it.
Right.
And it's expensive. But we have implemented a bunch of AI for search,
Right.
and for for finding similars and for keyword search. And so we're using AI in every way, shape, or form. We're engaging all the tools. We just have not rolled out a customer-facing generative fill option yet, because we haven't seen. I mean, we still do need to pay the bills, And right now, I mean, if you look at Getty's balance sheet, I mean, they're they might be grossing $1 billion a year, but they're spending $1.1 billion.
Right. Yeah, and
So,
that's one of the challenges, I think, where people who aren't in the business don't realize, every time you're hitting that server to generate an image, you're that there's a cost structure to that. And
exactly.
if somebody's just playing on your website, it may seem like you're doing what you used to do, which was go to a light table with some slides and with an eyepiece and look at all the various options that are there, then you pick the one. Well, generative may feel like the same thing, right? Hey, but every time you're doing that, you're paying for that slide, if you will.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
You're being dinged for it. And
Exactly. So depending on who's paying for it. But listen, I think we're obviously in the middle of a revolution.
Sure.
So, I'm not going to take a stand one way or another. I think it's a pretty valuable tool. I think how it's going to net out is still a big question mark to all of us, but I do think it's getting exciting, and it's, interesting landscape.
Well, it is one of those things where, a lot of the legal side hasn't even been worked out, right? Because when you generate an image, who owns that, right? No one technically owns it, right? So if you're licensing it, who really owns that? I don't know if that's been actually determined yet. And I mean, except to determine that an AI can't create anything. So therefore there's no copyright. But if you're using it for commercial use, and it's just, oh my gosh. And then you have to issue with, who did you have the original license to even look at the images to build your models from?
Right. And I think there's some lawsuits that are kind of in play currently on all that. But listen, we do take some we do license some AI generated content on Superstock. And there have been some pictures that I see, I have this live feed that shows me everything that gets licensed. And I saw a picture, and I mean, I figured out in a second that it was AI, but it was great. I mean, it was really, really great. It was like somebody pouring a drink with, steam coming off it or something. And I commented to one of our guys, I'm like, oh my God, we sold this digital picture. And I said, I think the picture's great. I couldn't have shot it for that. And he said, of course you could have shot it. I'm like, yeah, I could have shot it, but it would have been expensive and there would have been a lot of retouching. And the fact that we managed the rights to that picture for whatever, and we licensed it, it was great. And to your point, yes, people can make them themselves, But at the same time, if you're an art director and you just need a picture of XYZ and you just see it, it's like, I don't need to spend 45 minutes prompting stuff,
Right.
Let me just license it. Clients are paying for it anyway. So
Yeah, and time is money in those cases, because if you spend any time at all on these models and doing these things, you can start and then 2 hours later you're still dorking around with it.
oh, it is a time suck. It's kind of like early days of Photoshop, or even
Right.
thinking time in the darkroom. It's all equivalent. I mean, you could go down a dark hole and it's really fun, but it just, next time you look at your watch, you're like, oh my God. So
One of the things that's happening is, I think it all actually raises the bar of what's possible and the quality thereof, because like you said, that image that was created was pretty darn good. And
right.
if you're really shooting that type of image, right, a cup with steam coming off of it or whatever, that's what you're competing against.
But no. So here's something. This is of interest. So for a minute, I think especially ad agencies were over-retouching pictures, like
Absolutely.
photoshopping them to death,
Right.
So even something that I think would have been great as is, it got like, oh, I want to change this, I want to move this, I want to change this, nearly to death. Now, what we're seeing with AI is you could just create that right out of the bag. I think what we're seeing is a swing back to show me something that makes me believe that it was really shot.
Right.
And I think we're going to see that trend.
Well, yeah, so I mean, we're definitely seeing it in the capture side of the business with the growth of film, right? Where there's like people are saying, "Hey, look, this is really an authentic picture." Now, again, I'm like you. I haven't shot a lot of film because in the
Yeah.
last 20 years, because there's a digital thing, but there's certainly that approach that
Right.
and I think that's something that people got to remember in this business, because that authenticity piece is what's important, right? That is what I think you can ascribe an actual higher value to, as opposed to an AI generated image.
Right. Or something that's just over retouched to perfection, that it's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
it's obviously not real. So anyway, I think that's a really interesting trend that we're going to see, that I'm enjoying. Those of us that are professionals, I mean, your eyes are pretty finely tuned anyway.
Right.
And the pictures are 90% of the way there anyway to begin with, unless you're doing some crazy compositing.
And on the video side, with video assets, I think that's actually going to have a bigger impact, I think, in a lot of ways, because, the entertainment industry is going to be impacted a lot by this, because, I know a lot of stock images are, used in film, right? Or stock
Yes,
footage that's in background of us. Now a lot of that stuff can be generated.
that's correct. I think that's gonna be huge. And I think, even what we've seen is, like rotoscoping, like when, the difference, say we were doing a campaign where we were doing the TV and the stills, and we knew something had to be retouched. It was not a big deal. It's like, yeah, we'll just do that in post. On the footage, though, it was something, because we're going to have to get it rotoscoped, and it was expensive. Now we've seen some of our editors, being able to use some of the tools out there and just remove things or change things.
Right.
And it's gotten good. But the whole live action production, we're going to see some crazy changes. And, think about it with volume walls now. I mean, the stuff that we're being able to do is pretty amazing.
Now, what do you mean by a volume wall, for the people who don't know what that is?
Well, they have, and I guess the one thing that everybody knew is like how they shot The Mandalorian.
Right.
Because that was, I think, the first show to ever use it. So think about a 270-degree video wall that's moving, including the ceiling. And you see it in a lot of car campaigns too.
Yeah.
So the environment is real. And it's not like just you're shooting in front of a picture, because it's a video background.
Right.
So as the camera moves, it moves just like your eye would do it. But you're doing it in the studio. So what you see is, like, sometimes you see these car ads today that it's like they're driving through the desert, but the truth is, the only desert that's there is, your art department has built the floor with a bunch of rocks, and they elevate the car so the wheels are spinning, but then the whole background is just moving, and you have hydraulic jacks to make the cars move. So I think what that's doing is, granted, I'm a guy that started out really loving to go on location.
Right.
And that's why I got into it. And I wanted to travel and go on location. Unfortunately, a lot of what we're going to see going forward is you're going to be able to produce some really stellar work in a studio.
Right. I've seen some behind the scenes stuff on some of the movies that are out there. Like I didn't really even realize this, but like there was that Batman movie from a couple of years ago. That was almost all shot inside a studio.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
like the car chases and everything, there were no
Yeah.
actual moving vehicles, and you can't
Yeah.
tell.
No, you can't tell. And pretty much any TV show you see with like people having a conversation in a moving car, I mean, it's not real.
Well, it never used to be that way before, but you could tell, right? I mean, you could
Right,
see
right.
they would have like the screen behind them jiggling,
Yeah, yeah,
like I'm thinking
yeah.
like Andy Griffith show or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think it's going to open a lot of doors to some really amazing creativity,
Sure, sure, and it's going to impact a lot of people, right? I mean, like you were saying before we started, there's going to be some fallout. There's going to be some attrition in the industry.
Right.
It's going to happen.
But I think some jobs will go and then some new jobs will come,
Right. Yeah.
and they'll be different. I mean, and who knows what they'll be, but you're already seeing it. There's like, might be tech jobs, but yeah, I don't know if it'll totally balance out what we lose to what we gain, but I
Right.
think part of that also, if you talk about gear, how gear has become so much, I'll just say lighter,
Right.
smaller.
Oh, sure.
You don't need as many guys on or as many people, on your grip and electric departments
Sure.
anymore because you don't need as much light
And you
and
get
also,
and you get a multiple cameras from different angles at the same time because you got
yeah,
put
yeah,
GoPros or Insta 360s
yeah,
or drones all in the same shot capturing different angles is something.
that's true. And even if you're using bigger cameras, compared to when we were doing film, your ISOs are higher, so
Mhm.
you don't need as much light. And yeah, so it's made production, I think it's probably brought down the cost of
Mhm.
production. It's probably had a net loss of some jobs in terms of
Absolutely. The
on the grip.
gapper.
Yeah, those guys. But I think it's made it exciting. I
Yeah.
mean, because you could think of doing some really interesting things without needing to spend a fortune.
Mhm. And yeah, I was just read something the other day about how, when Apple produced their race car movie recently, they actually because they could, they took the guts of an iPhone and put it inside the rear view mirror or something on one of the cars just so they could say they used an iPhone in the production. And it was just really cool, right? It was just something because of that small camera they could do that.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, like when you see the ads, for the new iPhone 17, and
Right.
I mean, the camera technology it's kind of nuts.
Yeah. But what's never going to stop though is the personal side of it, right? I mean, like you said, that piece of the business, as much as change you've seen over the years,
Right.
right? The ability to, yeah, you can have all this great technology and all these workflow process and all this AI stuff, but if you can deliver the job on time, on budget for the client,
Right. And it has to have some soul.
right?
How many bad TV shows or movies have you seen that just were soulless?
Yeah.
Because they're leaning on these whiz bang technological gags. But if you could put some heart in it and some
Right.
soul in it, I think that's what, to your point, I think that's what's going to continue forever. And storytelling, just storytelling.
Speaking of continuing forever, where can people go for more information about what you do and your various companies?
Well, I would love you. You're all welcome to visit the website, which is scpictures.com, which is our production website. If you're looking to license any content or you want to be a contributor to license content, it's superstock.com.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I'm on LinkedIn and Stewart Cohen and Instagram, SC Pictures. And yeah, we'd love to have a conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Stuart. This has been fun. Like I said, it's fun to trace the path of somebody who kind of started in the analog days and made the transition to digital, didn't look back, and is now looking forward. So,
Well, Gary, I didn't think we were going to be going back that far, but it was a fun walk down memory lane there. So thank you.
and we're thanks so much, Stuart. Take care. I hope to talk to you again soon.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. Read more great stories and sign up for the newsletter at www.thedeadpixelssociety.com.